I was just talking to a client today and they said, look, this is really interesting stuff, Jeff, but we have to come up with a business case for doing the work. And that business case has to include like cost estimates. What will it cost to produce this, and ROI projections and all of that. And we can't get a project funded without that. And the reality is that everything that goes into that business case is a guess. And so changing that mindset is difficult, and getting organizations to manage to a different set of goals seemingly is a trivial change, right? The pithy phrase here would be outcomes over output, right? But as you start to peel that onion, the layers, the impact that this has on an organization is actually pretty significant.
Welcome back to Exploring Growth. Today, I have the privilege of sitting down with an expert in measuring success. My guest today is Jeff Gothelf, author, speaker, and trainer at Sense and Respond Learning. And we're going to dive into why and how you can build OKRs to track success throughout your organization. And as I've seen personally, for most leaders, it's kind of an afterthought or a bolt-on. But today we want to discuss how it can be something that is part of your actual culture. So welcome to the show, Jeff.
Thank you so much, Lee. It's a pleasure to be here.
So let's start with who are you? Tell us a little about your background.
Sure. So my background is in design. I started off as a web designer in the early days of the web 1.0 days, the .com days.
Yeah.
Those were heady times.
Yeah.
Good times. Learned a lot on the client's dime mostly.
Oh yeah, sure. Who hasn't? Yeah.
Those were interesting times. But as the web became more interactive, my roles became more sophisticated. So started off as a web designer and then into information architecture, UI and UX design, eventually leading teams and getting into product management. And then in the late 2000s, I started working at a company called The Ladders in New York City, leading their UX design team and working with folks inside and outside that organization. We began to solve the problem of designing in an agile software development environment, which is a real issue and actually kind of continues to this day. That work turned into my first book called Lean UX. And as that book came out, the things that people were asking me to do changed. So I was designing and leading design teams and doing product management and product work. And then all of a sudden the book came out and people said, hey, come teach us this stuff that's in the book, which is really interesting. I didn't expect that. Yeah. And so since then, I've been working as a trainer and a keynote speaker. I've written a few more books since then, mostly with Josh Seiden, my business partner and co-author. And these days, I work as a trainer and a speaker and an author. But the scope of the conversation that we've had over the years has grown. So we started very tactically. How do you do design in an agile organization? And then it was more about cross-functional collaboration, leading software development teams in software-driven businesses, and then most recently, objectives and key results, which is a human-centric approach to goal setting.
Yeah, that's great. Well, that sort of trickle effect makes a lot of sense, and naturally, you're going to end up with OKRs, kind of being the center point of the conversation. So that's great. So, let's kind of start high level, right? And then we can get into the weeds. Why do a lot of companies not operate with an OKR mindset?
Well, so look, let's just set some sort of foundations, right? So OKRs is not a new thing. It's been around for over 40 years, started off with Andy Grove at Intel, and it was popularized in 2016 with the success of John Doerr's book, Measure What Matters. And, in Andy Grove's world and then in John Doerr's book, he wasn't particularly opinionated about what a good OKR looks like. Right? What should we be measuring for success? And what's interesting is that in our book, Who Does What by How Much, we take a very opinionated point of view that your outcome, your objectives and key results need to be customer-centric. So qualitative objective that talks about a qualitative future state you'd like to create for your customers. And then key results that are outcomes. They're measures of human behavior. And that to me is the fundamental shift here, is that we're measuring success not in terms of creating an output, but actually delivering an outcome, hopefully a meaningful and positive change to the customer, and that ultimately impacts the business in a positive way. And so, to get back to your original question, why don't most companies work this way? Most companies don't work this way because there is tremendous historical inertia to manage to production, to the making of a thing that comes from the industrial manufacturing
Sure.
world, and there's a real clear understanding in manufacturing. Whereas I'm going to pay folks to produce something, and they will produce that thing, and then
Mm-hmm.
hopefully we will sell that thing and make money. And that makes sense when you're producing physical goods, but all businesses of scale and all businesses that seek to scale today are software businesses, regardless of the product or service that they ultimately offer.
Mm-hmm.
And the production of software as a measure of value just doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense because the rate with which we can produce and deliver software into the hands of our customers is literally as fast as we want. Amazon does it once every second,
Mm-hmm.
right? So if you can deliver software into the hands of your customers once every second, the delivery of software as a measure of success doesn't make sense anymore. It's a non-event, right?
Right.
Did we deliver software today? Yes, 60 times a minute we
Yeah.
did, right? Or once an hour or 5 times a day or whatever it ends up becoming. And so changing that mindset is a massive shift,
Mm-hmm.
right? If delivering a thing is no longer the measure of success, what is the measure of success and value? And the reality is it's human behavior. And we're just not used to measuring that across organizations. Organizations are good at measuring two things. They're used to measuring sort of the KPIs, the high level impact metrics of a business, so sales, revenue, profit, customer satisfaction. And they're used to measuring production. Did we make stuff, and how much stuff did we make? But the connective tissue between those two things is human behavior, right? Did people look for the stuff that we made? Did they try it? Did they use it? Did they use it more than once? Did they tell
Mm-hmm.
their friends? Did they pay us money for it? Et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, right? And so it's a complete mindset. I was just talking to a client today, and they said, "Look, this is really interesting stuff, Jeff, but we have to come up with a business case for doing the work, and that business case has to include like cost estimates. What will it cost to produce this, and ROI
Mm-hmm.
projections, and all of that. And we can't get a project funded without that. And the reality is that everything that goes into that business case is a guess. And so changing that mindset is difficult, and getting organizations to manage to a different set of goals seemingly is a trivial change, right?
Mm-hmm.
The pithy phrase here would be outcomes over output, right? But as you start to peel that onion, the layers, the impact that this has on an organization is actually pretty significant.
Sure. Okay. So customer centric, we're getting somewhere with that. What about the things that are hard to measure? So in my world, marketing, there's this term that's been thrown around as called dark social. And essentially what it is have you heard of this term?
No, I'm
Okay.
intrigued.
Yeah. So it's, marketers are good at coming up with acronyms. They're good at coming up with terms. That's what we do. So we confuse ourselves by creating new terms all the time.
Yeah.
But there's this term's been thrown around. And essentially what it is, the best description I've heard of it is the conversation that's happening behind the scenes, especially in a B2B scenario, where you see the markers of them visiting your website or even downloading a podcast. Like, you see the kind of surface level interactions, but then all the interactions that happen behind the scenes that you can't see is what the dark part of it is. And an interaction behind the scenes might be sharing sharing a post inside of a LinkedIn DM and then having a conversation about it with your colleague inside LinkedIn, or sharing inside of a Slack group forum and having a conversation about it there. Of course, internally in your company as well. Group text, right, where you're texting a bunch of, whether it's for work or for personal on the consumer side. It's all the conversation and sort of community that comes around it that's happening behind the scenes. So, we were started off real high level, and I just jumped right down to the
Mhm.
to the weeds here. But it just came to mind, like, because that's the world I live in, is the things that you can't measure. Where does this? Because what you're talking about being customer centric is totally, in the behind the scenes type of behavior when it comes to marketing. That's the stuff we want to be able to measure. How do you adopt this mentality of being consumer or customer centric OKR, but it's hard to measure?
So I get this question a lot, right? And the question comes up kind of like like there's stuff that we can't measure, or
Mhm.
should we set a goal that we can't measure, or that. I tend to be an optimist, and I tend to believe that we can pretty much measure anything, or at least
Okay,
get a sense of anything. So when I
sure.
talk about measuring customer behavior, certainly the visible behavior that people uh, do as they interact with our systems, with our campaigns, with our products, with our
Hmm.
services is the obvious stuff that we can measure, right? So the stuff that analytics tools give us back. But you're right, stuff happens behind the scenes. And there are conversations that take place that we don't know about. So how do we find that stuff out? First of all, it shouldn't stop us from setting a goal that for a metric that resides in this sort of obscure, the dark side of the moon, if
Hmm.
you will,
Yeah.
right? Um, the second thing is, okay, well, how are we going to find out that these conversations are happening, and to what extent? And if we can't measure them quantitatively, then at the very least we can try to find out if they're happening qualitatively,
Okay.
right? So, for example, you've got your target audience, right? And so on a regular basis, you're speaking to, let's say every 2 weeks you talk to 5 people, right?
Hmm.
Which I think is a fairly reasonable
Sure.
task. When I advise teams, usually I want them talking to 3 to 5 people every week. But let's just say
Hmm.
it's 5 people every 2 weeks. So on an average month, you're talking to 10 to 15 people, and you're asking them the same kinds of questions. Hey, how did you hear about the product? Hey, where are you getting information about these kinds of products? Oh, I'm in this Slack group, and they always exchange links. Oh, I'm you know what? My friends on LinkedIn, my connections on LinkedIn are always sharing stuff with me back channel, right?
Hmm.
Or whatever it is, right? And so you're looking for those patterns over time. So
Hmm.
qualitatively, you're saying, look, this month, 3 out of 10 people told us that they learned about the product through a DM exchange on LinkedIn. Right.
Right.
Next month, it's 8 out of 10. Next month, it's 9 out of, like, and so you're looking for those trends that tell you that this stuff is happening, and
Hmm.
to over time. I'll tell you a story. Right. This is really interesting because actually, um, when I used to work at a company called The Ladders in New York City, which was a job board. And at the time, it was a job board for people who made $100,000 or more. And this was between the years of 2008 and 2012. And during that time period, texting became a thing in the US, right? And when I started my job, texting was new. It was a thing that kids did, but it was not a thing. It was not a legitimate form of communication.
Right.
Certainly not for executives who made a hundred thousand
Yeah,
dollars.
because it came out of the development world, right?
Right.
If I remember correctly.
Exactly. And
Yeah.
so, like in the eyes of senior executives looking for their next job, this was not a viable professional communication channel.
Mhm.
Certainly not for job hunting.
Sure.
And I would meet 3 to 5 job seekers every week because we would invite them in and have these conversations with them. And over the first 2 years, just talking to 3 to 5 people every week, asking the same setup questions. We always had something specific, but the same setup questions every time. It became clear that this behavior pattern was changing more and more and more and more. Um, these executives were fearing that their bosses could would read their emails, or any other sort of company owned communication
Yeah.
channels, but they saw texting as a safe way to communicate with headhunters. And so
Gotcha.
all of a sudden, we're seeing a shift in behavior. We weren't looking for that shift in behavior,
Yeah.
right? We were just qualitatively measuring a consistent set of questions
Yeah.
over an extended period of time. And we saw
Okay.
that behavior change, right? So this is one way to do that.
Yeah. So it really just comes back to simply asking your customers, your prospects, even lost sales for feedback, and measuring that qualitatively, so that you can eventually maybe turn into a new mode of communication, or new platform, or something that is qualitatively measured.
And I would argue again, or double down on the fact that this should be a consistent activity,
Hmm.
especially if there are you know that there's stuff happening that is
Yeah.
not easily measurable or
Hmm.
accessible to you, and you don't want to overestimate it or underestimate it. And so like we did at the ladders, every week 3 to 5 people, every week 3 to 5 people,
Yeah.
right? So you're investing, you can invest 90 minutes every week, 2 hours every week in doing this, but you're building that qualitative set of insights and you're kind of seeing the behavior shift
Hmm.
over time.
Yeah. And also, it makes me think, there's a finite number of ways that people are communicating with one another. It's not an infinite unknown of, modes of communication. So in this case, it might be LinkedIn DMs, group text, Slack, Reddit, the social platform, messaging, Facebook groups. Like, you may end up having 10 or maybe 15 different avenues that you need to pursue or ask about. But as you start to get feedback, you're going to start to see the patterns, and that's where the consistency is going to make a lot of difference.
Sure. And
Um,
look, and without going down too far of a rabbit hole of how to do a proper customer interview, right? You don't have to bias the question at all with, do
mhm,
you use LinkedIn DMs for X or do you
that's
use
right.
Slack for Y? Hey, tell me about the last time you heard about a new product. Oh,
Right.
well, I'm in the Slack group and they're always sharing it, right? So
Yeah.
you're letting folks tell you where they get that information, and then you can double down and dig into it once they share that with you.
Yeah. Okay. I like it. All right. So going back to our kind of more high level conversation about OKRs, we're talking about methodology. Um, and where, so if you're talking to companies, where should they look to, um, I guess we could talk about adopting a certain methodology, but then where should they look at deploying that methodology first in their company? Does it matter? I mean, does it need to be in a certain domain or?
That's a great question. The reality is the framework, the objectives and key results framework, certainly the way that we have defined it in our
Mhm.
book, is applicable anywhere in the organization. That was by design. We wanted to make sure that this was clear, that this was a goal setting framework for teams, but any
Yeah.
team in the organization. Now, if you read the case studies in the book, you'll notice a pattern about where these organizations that have successfully deployed OKRs in this way have started. They've started with the teams that are most likely to succeed. So, what does that typically mean? It typically means that they're customer facing teams.
Hmm.
So, they're facing the actual buyers, the consumers of the product or service. Usually, they're going to be the digital teams, the tech teams in those situations. And they're
Hmm.
going to be sort of the most forward thinking teams within that particular organization. Why? Because A, it's really easy to get data from actual customers because you're selling directly to them. B, digital channels are easy to learn from and easy to update. And C, if you've got sort of a modern cross-functional product development team, they can learn and adapt and iterate on the product very quickly to see how well they're learning. So while it's not a universal a universal law that you have to go down this particular path, if you look at case studies across organizations, the companies that have done this well typically started with these consumer facing teams and usually the digital consumer facing teams.
Okay. All right. So tell me more about your philosophy. I know we've kind of talked around it a little bit, but let's get to the root of, like, what's your philosophy on human centric OKRs?
Yeah. So the fundamental difference here, right, is that we take a strongly opinionated point of view that if you make the customer successful, you will make the business successful. Now, obviously, you've got to balance that with the business needs and sustainability and costs and all
Sure.
that stuff. But ultimately, right, our goal is to solve a meaningful problem for our customers or delight them in some way or help them achieve some kind of a benefit that they're looking for. Right.
Hmm.
So we want to define success in the same way that our customers define success. Right. Our customers don't define success by saying, I got calendar integration. Right? Like really, like no, I don't think anyone's ever said that, right? Our customers define success by saying, "Ah, you know what? Ever since I signed up for that calendaring tool, I don't miss any more meetings."
Mm.
Ah,
Yeah. So is it sort of an outcome driven?
it's exactly
Uh,
right. That's
okay.
exactly right. Yeah. So it's outcome driven, right? So
Okay.
if you look at the way that we define objectives and key results, the objective is a qualitative future state that we'd like to create for our customers. So, right, the most reliable way to ensure attendance at meetings,
Hmm.
right? Something like that, right? Doesn't say how we're going to do it. It just talks about, it's qualitative, it's aspirational, it's inspirational, provides value to the customer and to the business, and it's time box. So we want to be the most reliable way to never miss a meeting again by the end of next year, something along those lines. The key results answer the question, how will we know that we are the most reliable way to never miss a meeting again?
Mhm.
And that's
That's a
going to
great
be,
question too, by the way. I mean, just to sit on that for a second. I
yeah,
don't think companies or leaders inside their departments, I don't think they think about that question enough. How
yeah,
will we know that we've found success? That's a huge question. I mean,
yeah.
not to be glazed over,
No, not at all. And typically the answer is we built a thing, right?
right?
But in this case, what we're looking for are metrics that are outcomes, that are measures of human behavior. So, what will people be doing differently when we're the most reliable way to never miss a meeting again? And the way that you know that you've written at least a well written key result that is a measure of human behavior is that it has to answer the question, who does what by how much? So it's not a coincidence
Mhm.
that that's the name of the book,
Yeah,
right? Because
great title, by the way, because
thank you.
it really puts you right to the heart. I love when books do that, where they put you right to the heart of the solution in the title, but you don't
Yeah,
really realize that fully until you read it.
yeah.
So, just as an aside, yeah.
Thank you. And that's exactly right. Like that's so the way that you know that you're setting at least a well-written goal. It may not be the right
Hmm.
goal. There's lots of options, but at the very least you've written a human-centric key result is it has to answer the question, who does what by how much. So for our objective to create reliable way to never miss a meeting again, key result could be existing customers, um, I don't know, existing customers enter 50% more meetings per month on a month over month basis, or a
Hmm.
year over year basis, right? 50% more meetings per month. So we see
Yeah.
people relying on the tool a bit more, right? We can see the number of alerts that are generated by specific, that are set by specific people, whatever it is, right? But we're looking for behaviors that indicate that we're actually delivering value. Because again, the production of a thing doesn't guarantee value. It just guarantees the production of a thing. That's
Hmm.
it.
Yeah, I like that, and you're really getting at the behavior. You're getting at what drives, what motivates the person, because you're talking about getting team members to show up to meetings more often, or whatever it was. The example, you're getting at the heart of what drives them and what motivates them, and trying to define that versus this producing more show ups.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think that's really interesting.
The and this and what's interesting about that as well is that you'll notice that neither in the objective nor in the key results did I mention that the solution is going to be in there,
Mhm.
right? We deliberately exclude the solution from our OKR format because there is an infinite number of combinations that you can put together to achieve the behavior change.
Yeah, it's interesting. That's a great revised look at OKRs, because it's sort of, I think the way you said that there's a almost an infinite number of combinations to the solution, and I have always really thought about OKRs as more two dimensional, where the result is the solution, and you're
Mhm.
saying it's not. You're saying the result is the result, and it points to the solution. So I think that's
Correct.
that's super interesting.
The solution is the variable, right? That's the interesting part here. Like we
Yeah.
usually get so married to the thing that we're building,
Hmm.
but if the thing that we're building doesn't positively impact the behavior of the people who consume it,
Hmm.
then we built the wrong thing. And so the measure of success again is how are we impacting behavior? And this is where it gets like so defining the OKR is actually the relatively easy part. I mean, there's some work there, there's some editing and whatever, and some reconciliation, but it's what happens after
Mhm.
that becomes really interesting.
Yeah, this is great. Okay, so next, what I want to look at is how do you build this into your culture? You know,
Mm.
how a company thinks and acts around this sort of philosophy.
So this is tough, right? So this is a mindset shift for an organization because it has to take into account a couple of things. Number one is we've got to start to move away from rewarding and incentivizing and promoting the just hey, we made it, we made a mobile app. Okay. Did anyone download it? Right. So that's number one. It's
Yeah.
to get that in there. But more importantly, is we have to build a culture that encourages learning
Mhm.
and that encourages continuous improvement. Because
Mhm.
inevitably, right? So when we prescribe a solution, whether it's us or our bosses or our stakeholders, or maybe we take some direction from a customer, right? When we prescribe a solution, there are a whole bunch of assumptions baked into that solution. And so we take on a tremendous amount of risk by just blindly saying, okay, we're going to go build that. Now, if we work with human-centric OKRs, the team is still going to have at some point they're going to devise an opinion, a hypothesis about how to achieve this behavior change, and they're going to start working.
Mhm.
Inevitably, along the way, they're going to learn that some of their assumptions were wrong. We have to create the kind of culture that makes it safe for those folks to raise their hand and say, "Hey, boss, I know I told you we were building this mobile app. The more we look at it, it's just this service that we're delivering doesn't make sense in the mobile channel. And so what we're thinking about doing is pivoting to a desktop only
Mhm.
application or to fixed kiosks in the workplace or whatever it is. But the point is that we've got to create the culture that encourages learning and that encourages the course correction that is driven by that learning. And so there has to be psychological safety for folks to do that. And a lot of organizations, it's not there. It's not particularly safe to raise your hand and say, hey, we're not going to build that thing that you told us to, boss.
Mhm. Yeah, I like that. It's experimenting, and
It is.
and a culture of experimentation is a good culture, you know, that is progressing and learning and growing. Um, Ultimately, going to get where you want to go. Um, for the CEOs in the room, for the maybe shareholders that are have an invested stake, what would how would you parse this to them where they're like, okay, this all sounds great, but how does this make me money?
Yeah.
Right? How
Uh,
does this make me more profitable?
so a couple of messages there. So let's start with what they can do to encourage this, and then let's talk about how this makes money.
Okay.
So first and foremost, model the behavior. The most powerful thing that you can do as a leader in an organization is to model this behavior that says, look, um, I believe we should do X, but in the face of evidence that contradicts X, I'm willing to change my mind. And then if the
Mhm.
evidence does show up, you change your mind, right?
Yeah.
Simply by you doing it and your team seeing you do it, they now know it's safe. They can do it too,
Yes. They
right?
they don't fear ch- uh, changing their mind and having recourse, negative recourse, because they've seen you model it. I think that's a great place to start.
It's huge. All right. So that's what you can do. And it's really easy. I mean, it really is. It really is easy to do, and it's massively powerful. How does this make you money? So I talked before. I said typically organizations measure two things, right? They
Hmm.
measure high level success metrics, KPIs, right? Sales, profit, revenue, customer satisfaction, that type of thing, and they measure the production of a thing. What happens in between, right? What happens is people interact with that stuff. And so one of the most powerful exercises that we do with the leaders and the stakeholders of the organizations that we work with is we literally visualize the connection between those two endpoints, between the output and the impact metrics. And we say, okay, great. What do people do first? Okay, great. Or we start at the top. We say, look, hey, we make money. What are all the ways that we make money? And we list out all those activities. Okay, what happens before that? Cool. What happens before that? What happens before that? And before you know it, you've built this tree of outcomes, right? This
Hmm.
literal visualization of all the behaviors that happen in your system. And then you look at your leaders and you say, look, strategically, what do we care about in the next 12 to 18 months? Which of these levers should we pull? Because as you can now see, these levers are directly connected to profit, sales, revenue, customer satisfaction, whatever it is, right? You can see that when we do this, then this happens, then we make money, right? So which of these levers should we pull, right, are the most important to us? And remember, we only have 6 teams, right? So we can't do it all. And so it becomes a realistic conversation that speaks to the behavior changes that we want to influence that directly impact the success metrics of the business. And so I think that is a super powerful exercise, and it starts to really draw attention away from, well, just make me that thing, to, okay, I see. If we get this type of customer to connect with 7 other people in the system within their first 2 weeks of using the system, they tend to stick around longer and renew their subscription. Right? So let's focus on getting that person connected to 7 people in the first 2 weeks. Right. And so that's a fundamentally different conversation that is a leading indicator of making money.
Yeah. It sounds like behavioral Six Sigma. That's what it sounds like to me. It's like you're looking at the behavior first around the production and around the consumption, and you are prioritizing the behavior as metrics for improving the production and the consumption. And therefore, in theory, it should produce a more profitable process or product.
And I think the in theory part is important, right? Because again, one of the things that we stress is that you're taking a guess. No one likes to admit that. Right? We have lots of words to avoid using the word guess. We talk a lot about requirements. Right?
Yes.
That's a big one, right? We use the word hypothesis and assumptions a lot. But if you want to boil it down to the simplest word, it's a guess. Now, it's not a blind guess in most cases. In a lot of cases, it's an educated guess, and that's great. But since we are not in a position to predict the future, right, we've got to admit that that's what we're doing. And that immediately starts to open up the conversation. Well, how are we going to de-risk the guess? Right. Super interesting.
Yeah, it really is. It's a great perspective on that. Okay. So last piece here is, how does this all play out practically in an organization? And on our pre-call, you were saying you have a lot of examples and studies from the book you can point to on what this looks like practically. Maybe you can share a few of those with us.
Sure. So we worked hard in the book to find case studies from a variety of different types of businesses. So not just digital businesses or tech-driven businesses. And so one of my favorite case studies came from a German company called Metro. Now, Metro is a huge company, right? The 200,000 employees. They're a restaurant and supermarket supplier. That's what they do. Okay. Now, the restaurant supplies there's a timeliness factor here, right? Supermarkets as well, but particularly for restaurants, right? They need stuff for their menu today or for the next 2 days or that type of thing. And they can't have a whole lot of overstock in there.
Right.
And so, Metro runs warehouses distributed throughout Europe and Germany and Europe especially. And they have to continuously optimize how those warehouses operate.
Sure.
Right. So they have an objective to create, the most responsive, timely restaurant distribution warehouses in Europe. And their key results are things like the time to fill an order, the time to deliver an order, the amount of returns that they get from the customers, things like that, the amount of food waste that they generate. And it's fascinating because it has to do, there's so many elements that they can optimize for, right? There's the picking and packing of just getting food off the warehouse shelves. There's the, how do we pack the truck aspect of it? There's the route for the truck. There is, should we specialize by restaurant type? Like all the Asian restaurants get this side of the warehouse, and all the Italian restaurants get this side of the warehouse, right? And that type of thing. And it's a fascinating case study where they've got these success metrics, and they're continuously experimenting with various formats and layouts and processes in the warehouse to optimize for these behavior changes, right? And sometimes it's technology assisted, and sometimes it isn't. And it's really an amazing story that illustrates that this works in any context, right? And isn't necessarily reliant on digital tools. Digital tools make it, easy and scalable, and the data comes back a bit faster, but you can apply this in any situation.
Yeah, I like it. On our pre-call, you mentioned a quote from Janice Frazier that you hold dearly, and I want to have you give it to us and kind of put it in the context to what we're talking about, because I think that, kind of wrapping all this up, that companies who want to measure and want to track things to get better and closer to their customer and improve everything, they have to adopt some kind of philosophy. And yours is very predicated on strong opinions. However, give it to you.
Yeah. So the quote is, and it's by Janice Frazier, strong opinions loosely held. Right. And I think that's the core foundational philosophy for this way of working. Right. Look, I think I'm a smart guy. Right. You probably think you're a smart guy. CEOs, founders, right? I've worked for a lot of CEO founders. They all think they're smart guys. Right.
Yeah.
And rightfully so. Right. We all have experience. We all have expertise. Okay. And so we're all going to form strong opinions based on our experience and expertise about what to do, how to do it, what good looks like, what bad looks like, et cetera. And that's great. And we should do that. Right. But when evidence comes back that our opinions, and to be clear, there are opinions, there are guesses about what to do, right? When evidence comes back that contradicts our strong opinion, we're willing to change our minds. That's it. To me, this is the definition of humility, and humility seems to always get a bad rap because people feel like it's like
weak.
It's like an abdication of leadership,
yes,
or a vision, right? But it's not. Humility simply says, "Look, I've got a strong opinion about something, right? But I'm smart enough and humble enough to say when I'm wrong about it, to learn from that and make a better guess the next time." And I think if you embody that philosophy, the culture that, like, if you plant that seed in your organization, the culture that grows from that is tremendously powerful.
Tremendously. I couldn't said it better myself. I agree so much. When I see it, it's very clear. And when I don't, the opposite, seeing a lot of ego, it's very clear. It becomes toxic on the other side. But yeah, no, that's a wonderful way to kind of paint the picture for measuring success. So thank you so much. This is great.
My pleasure.
So if we want to send people your way, which we do, where do we send them to connect with you?
The two best places are my website, so jeffgothelf.com, and the second best, equally as good, is LinkedIn. Feel free to connect with me there.
Okay. And the book, again, is?
The book is Who Does What by How Much, a practical guide to human-centric OKRs. It's available on Amazon. Really, anywhere you buy books online, it's available.
Yeah, I love it. I'm definitely going to pick that up. Thanks again for your time today and all your practical wisdom. I know that there's a lot of people getting a lot of value from this, so thanks a lot.
My pleasure, Lee. Thanks for having me on the show.